Hey, everybody. I'll give this another minute and then I'll begin.
Hello.
Hey, how are you, Andrew?
Sorry, what?
How are you?
Oh, I'm doing all right. Had you on mute.
Yeah, you and everybody else.
Actually, it was because I had Man of Steel on in the background a little bit.
Oh, well, if you got to take a back seat, it might as well be to Superman.
I turned it off because I had to pay attention in class, you know?
Yeah, well, it's good to have, good habits like that. All right. Oh, okay, here's another straggler. That's good. Whoops. Okay, well, that's not bad. I guess we can begin. Welcome to Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to class. I'm going to take a look really quick at our modules here because I just want to point out a couple of things. So here we are. We're in week 6. And notice you're going to have you got a shooting assignment going on this week, okay? What I'd like to know really quickly is how many of you already have cameras? By a show of thumbs up emojis. Anybody working with more than just a cell phone?
Yeah, I have a, Canon T3i. I don't know if that would work.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
T3i will work. Let me share my screen and I'll open up the the assignment really quick and we'll take a look at it together. So this is your first shooting assignment, okay? And what it is going to ask of you is that you consider, though I think there may be a way for you to figure out how to get around this, but consider checking out a camera from the UCF operations office, the equipment room. It's pretty easy to do. I've been in communication with them to make sure that they know that you guys might be coming. And they have a protocol for you, which I have embedded into the assignment here. And you also should have received an email from someone named Devin out of the UCF operations office, giving you the same set of instructions and informing you what the process is for you to check out equipment from the equipment room. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a shooting assignment where you may consider, and I think it's a really good idea that you do check out gear from UCF for a couple of reasons. The first of which is if you don't already have something to work with other than a cell phone, which is fine for maybe for the still images that are required of the assignment, this would be fine. But there's one aspect of the shooting assignment that'll require you to demonstrate something that's going to have some movement in it of the lens and of the focusing system. And so that's a technique that you're probably not going to be able to accomplish with your cell phone. And so you need a camera and lens that you're going to be able to manually focus. So at the equipment room, we have these cameras for you. I don't know if you can see that in my little thumbnail. Should I go full screen for a second? You're going to have this guy. This is the Panasonic FZ1000. And it is, it's like a Panasonic GH4, but it has the lenses built in. Okay, so it's got a built-in zoom lens already. So you won't have to, have lenses and stuff or check lenses out from UCF. It's just all in one. Comes with a tripod, and it's like a kit that you can rent from them. There's a number of these cameras. There's about 30 of them in inventory. So there's quite a number of these cameras. And if you check it out, what you can do is you can, through a series of buttons on the lens, you can activate a manual focus feature, which is part of what the assignment is about. So given that criteria, I think it's a good idea that you go ahead and check one of these cameras out for a couple of days and shoot your assignment. Now, I have between two sections of Cinematography 1, I have 126, I think, students. So it's not going to be a real good idea for you to prolong going in and checking out gear. The sooner you have the opportunity to do it, I think the better. Now, in my Monday class, a number of those folks already have their own cameras that they can manually focus. So it's not as big of a problem over there. So maybe a dozen out of 65 students in that class have their own cameras that I've been able to survey so far, which still leaves, quite a number of folks that are going to be competing with you for resources. So you don't want to wait and run the risk of not having something available to check out when the time comes. So bear that in mind. But what we're going to do is we're going to have a shooting assignment. If you haven't checked out gear, or if you haven't been to the UCF operations office yet, what this is going to do is it's going to break the ice on that relationship with them between you and the administration in the film department. Because you're going to need them and rely on them in the future for other classes, and you're going to start checking out gear more frequently from UCF to do your assignments from other courses. And so it's high time, if you haven't met them already, and if you haven't been down there yet, I think their room is 157. If you haven't checked out what they got going on down there, it's high time that you do, because moving forward, you're going to need them and the services that they provide. So we might as well get started here. That's the first benefit of this assignment. And then the second is it's your first shooting assignment, and it'll give you an opportunity to try some gear that maybe you haven't used before, and start your relationship with, your tools, your equipment, and the equipment that's available to you. So I think it'll be a fun little assignment. It's only 4 still images and 1 video clip. So it's not too taxing, I don't think. You could probably do it all in a day. Check out a camera on one day, shoot the next day, return it the day after that, kind of deal. So I don't want there to be a great deal of anxiety about it. It's not, it's not a tricky assignment, I don't think, in any aspect. If you do elect to do this on your iPhone or your Samsung or your LG, whatever you've got, the first 4 shots are, as I said, they can be still images. They don't have to be video clips. And you can achieve that easily on your cell phone. The other is what we call a focus throw, and I'm going to show you guys what that is here tonight. And I don't think you're going to be able to do that with your cell phone. Now, once upon a time, I had an app for my phone that gave me manual control over my iPhone, which was, I'm sorry, at the time I was using a Samsung Galaxy Note 4, I think it was. And it gave me manual control over my cell phone in terms of exposure, shutter speed and apertures and stuff to a limited degree, as much as a phone has to offer. And it wasn't bad. And I could select zones of focus within the frame, and it gave me the ability to sort of shift the focus from the foreground to the background. So it was a rudimentary form of control, but it's not the same kind of control that you're going to get, for instance, with this Panasonic camera. Okay, so I think it's in your best interest to go and check one of these out. Okay. Now I don't know how good the applications have gotten for these phones. If it's giving you pretty good control and you think that you can accomplish the assignment and you just really don't want to go down to campus yet, if you haven't been down there already and you're self-quarantined and you feel a little strange about it, you might be able to pull this off without checking out a camera.
There's
yeah.
there's an app
Yeah, I
I
had my,
use
I had
at
my
least
hand
for
raised.
Hold on, go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry.
It's okay.
there's an app that I use called ProCam, and it allows you to control all the like exposure, focus, like all kinds of stuff. It's like $5 on the App Store if you want to use that.
You got the whiz bang new Apple phone too, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody like me who's got, like, I think this is an iPhone 8 or 7. I think it's an 8. So, you know, I got one lens and it's one point of view. That's going to make it kind of hard even to do the still image assignment because, well, obviously you can always move closer to a subject or further away to get the appearance of a wider field of view. It's not really the same thing as changing the focal length on a lens. And if you rent this guy, you'll see why. Now, Trinity, you have 3 lenses on your phone, which show you different points of view with different lenses of different magnifications. And you will see a lot of the same properties that you would get with an SLR lens. Not quite the same, but certainly better than what you would get from a phone that only has one lens on the back. So just be aware if you've got, you know, some equipment that's a little bit older and maybe might be a little bit more challenging and you don't mind going to campus, I recommend picking up the little FC1000. Yeah, Alan.
I don't know. Can you see that I have the little icon for the hand raised?
I can, yes. It's small, but I can see it. Yes.
Oh, I didn't know if you could. Sorry.
I saw you do that too.
I did that too. But you said the Panasonic FZ1000 had a built-in camera. If you want
lens,
built-in lens, yeah, sorry, built-in lens. Yeah. Does UCF also let you rent out lenses that they have?
They do, but you won't need one with the FC1000. That's the beauty of it. It's already got a zoom built in, and it's like 25 to 400. So you're not going to need more than this for this little simple assignment.
Yeah,
but yeah,
in
the future, yeah.
I was going to use my own device, and I was just noting that if you could use their lenses on your devices, like.
Well, what device do you have?
I have the Rebel TI5 or TI6, T6i.
T6i? They up
T6. No, not T6i, just a Rebel T6.
Rebel T6. Does it shoot video?
Yeah.
It does.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I think they might rent you some lenses. You'll have to ask them. Now, here's the caveat about Cinematography 1. They don't really want to give out gear to Cinematography 1 in the program. And the only reason why is not because they don't trust you. It's because we have in the Cinematography 1 class right now, just this semester, we have 3 sections. I have 2 sections and I have 120 students. And then there's another class with another 45. So we have a lot of Cinematography 1 students. And if everybody went down there to check out gear, there'd be nothing left for any of the other classes. And we have capstone people shooting and we have master's people that might be shooting. Now, the spring semester is usually slower than the fall, so that's a plus. And if you went into them and told them that you had a Rebel already and you just wanted to, say, check out some, a couple of maybe
like Prime or
zooms. Well, they've got some Tokina zooms that they would probably be willing to rent you. They try to rent out the whole set of Rokinon Primes. I don't understand that logic. To me, it makes no sense because if you don't need all 8 lenses they want to send with you, you have to take them anyway. And the assignment is only going to call for requiring 3 different lenses. So rather than rent a whole kit of Rokinons, which might be kind of a pain, I would rent the Tokina Zoom instead and use that for the assignment.
Yeah.
But that's up to you. See what they're willing to let you take. If it's slow enough, they might be willing to let you take the Rokinons and then have fun with it. You know, rent the kit and go play for a couple of days. That would be really cool. But you won't need all that for this assignment. Just like I said, 3 lenses.
So you have to see, because I'm rocking with a 50mm EF lens right now. So I have to
50,
yeah, I love the 50 lens. It's my favorite lens. But
1.8 or 1.4.
it's a 1.8.
Okay, yeah, that's the nifty 50. Yeah, that's a nice lens. So in your case, you'd only need a wide angle and you'd need something that could give you a little bit of telephoto, like an 85 or a 100 or a 135. Do you have anything like that?
No, I don't have that
Okay.
large.
So in that case, you might consider going and renting like a Tokina 28-70
Oh, okay.
and just going with that for the assignment if they'll rent that to you. See what they have available. It's always based on availability and it's always first come, first serve. And I think they were talking about, I went in to see them a week before last and they seem to be okay with you know, renting gear out to the Cinematography 1 kids this semester because they weren't real busy. But things can change over there at the drop of a hat. So check with them and find out what they're willing to do for you. Okay. And if you can't, if they won't rent you any lenses, you could probably, I mean, you do the same thing that I would do with my cell phone, right? Which is 50mm lens. We used to have an old sort of saying, which is you can do anything you want with a 50mm lens. Back up 3 steps, it's a wide angle. Walk up 3 steps and it's a telephoto, right? And that's the joke, was the field of view changes. But the perspective of the subject versus the background doesn't change. And it would with an 85 or a 135 lens. You would see a difference in the way the background appears versus
Yeah, I don't have a good iPhone. I have like a 1 lens iPhone. So
yeah. I would go with your Rebel, and if not, you go with the FC1000.
okay.
Now, concerning the FC1000, I have put in your downloadable PDFs the instruction manual from Panasonic for that camera. So if you go in and check that camera out from the UCF film office, they'll probably give you a quick rundown on how to operate the camera. And then if you go to web courses to your downloadable section in section 6, the full instruction manual is in there in a PDF form for you as well. Okay. And then the instructions on how to check a camera out are on your PDF downloadable pages. And then here they are again. As I said, I embedded them in the assignment. Here's another quick look at what the camera is you'll be asking for if you go check it out. And then what you're going to do is you're going to create 4 images that demonstrate one of the 4 perspectives here. I'm sorry, 4 of the 6 perspectives here. I want you to show me a wide shot, a medium shot, and then a close-up. And then I would like you also to show me an insert shot, or what we call, we call it an insert shot or a cutaway shot, which is a close detail. Like here they show you a cutaway of an ECU. We call it extreme close-up of someone's eyes after we've seen, this is what we call a necktie close-up or a standard close-up, and then we push into an ECU like this, or we would cut from a close-up like this to something the hand is doing, like answering a phone call where we see the screen and the phone big in the frame with the hand, and that's about it. Sometimes we'll see inserts or cutaways of somebody looking at their watch face if they're checking the time, and then we cut away to the watch on someone's wrist for a real close-up. A shot like that, okay? And they probably should all tie together in some way. And then I want you to show me a focus pull, and I'm going to tell you what a focus pull is here in a couple of minutes. And that'll be a video clip. And so what you'll need to do is make a Word doc, and then put your images on the Word doc and label them like what we got here. Tell me what kind of camera you use and what lens you used if it's not the Panasonic. And then label your images. And then you're also going to put a link to your video clip, which is the focus focus objective, and I will check your link. I'll go to YouTube and I'll look at your video clip of your video shot. Okay, so your Word doc will have 4 images on it and then a link to YouTube with your focus throw clip. Okay, and all of that can be in a Word doc that you can submit on web courses on the assignment page. And it's due Sunday of week 8 after your midterm. So let's take a look really quick at the calendar. We're here. We're on the 16th. This is week 6 right here. Week 7 is next week. Week 8, your midterm is this week. Okay. So if your assignment is due on the 8th, it's due. Did I say the 8th? Sunday of week 8. So it's due on the, sorry about that. It's due on the 7th. Okay. This would be week 8, right? 6, 7, 8. Is that right? We better check that. I'm not sure. It might be the 28th. Hold on. Stand by. What did I ask for here? Because it's different for the 2 classes. Let's go back to modules and see what it says. Yeah, May 7th. You guys are you're due on May 7th. Okay, at midnight. All right, so just upload it. That gives you a lot of time to do this assignment. It's it's a full 2 weeks plus a couple of days. So you should have no problem getting that done, and it's pretty simple. If you have any questions about it or if you have any problems, just send me an email and we'll deal with it. Okay. All right. Yes.
I just wanted to know if by chance you had like an example video for the focus throw.
Yeah, I'm going to show it to you in my presentation here in a minute or two. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So let's get started then on my quick presentation for you here. So can you see this all okay, everybody? Yeah. Okay, good. Okay. So, oops, my heading is wrong. Sorry about that. We are looking at lenses today, cinema lenses. And I want to talk to you about a few things regarding cinema lenses, their structure and function. I want to talk to you a little bit about photographic lenses versus video or cinema lenses, because there are differences. We'll talk to you a little bit about how they attach to the camera if this is something you've never done before. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about the control on the lens, which is your aperture or diaphragm. And some lenses list the controls in f-stops and some list the controls in t-stops. And I want to sort of talk to you about those features and the difference between f-stops and t-stops. So how many of you have never handled a camera before? Let me get the stadium view here for a minute.
By camera, do you mean like film quality camera or just camera?
Camera.
Okay,
Like,
then I've handled one. So I retract my phrase.
DSLR, like a DSLR, or like the Rebel T2i or the Rebel 6, or this is a GH5. Have you used something like this before? Seen it before? Do you know anything at all about it, or is this the first time? Is there
I've seen it before, but aside from this, I've only used like a handheld Canon camera. Like I used it to conduct an interview one time.
Okay.
And it was like a little red camera, like you usually designed to take photos.
Oh, like a point and shoot camera?
Kind of, yeah. But it had the
Is that
capacity
what
to
you meant
record
by
video.
a camera?
Yeah.
Is that okay? So like a point and shoot. Okay. No, I'm going to talk to you tonight about cameras with interchangeable lenses. Okay.
Okay.
So from that point of view, that's what we'll be talking about. Okay. So if it's your first time dealing with this stuff, that's fine. This presentation is kind of geared towards somebody who's new at this. Okay. It's not an expert deep dive into this stuff because I don't want to overwhelm you guys. So I'm going to show you some stuff. I have a couple of these laying around. I'll show you. I have a couple of the Rokinon series of cinema lenses that I've mentioned before. Both of these series are made by Samyang Optics in Korea. And the Zines are like a professional series of cinema lenses, and the Rokinons are also cinema lenses, but they're maybe a little bit more like a prosumer lens. So they're not as expensive and not as, they don't have the same professional features that you would get with the Zine lenses, for instance. But I'm going to take a look at both of those with you. And I'm also going to talk to you about photographic lenses and the differences between photographic lenses and cinema lenses. So the first thing that we want to do is think about what photographic lenses were designed to do and what cinema lenses are designed to do. And in order to do that, you have to really understand the difference between what a still photographer does and what a cinematographer does. So still lenses versus cinema lenses each have unique characteristics and functions, but at the end of the day, they're simply two sides of the same coin. If you're a still photographer, you're going to operate your camera and your lenses as a one-man operation or a one-person operation. Okay. Here, for instance, is a still film camera from this one is my Series 2 Olympus Om1. So this one I think I got around probably around 1983 or 4. My initial OM1 was purchased in 1975. Okay, so these are film cameras. Okay, and back when I worked professionally as a photographer, I used to use Olympus film cameras. And when you shoot with a photographic camera, the idea is that you're looking through a viewfinder and you're focusing the lens by hand. You're pointing it at your subject. When you get it in focus, you're advancing the film and then you're taking a picture. Okay. And that's basically the process. And so photographic lenses are designed for that kind of workflow, that kind of activity, right? Shooting, focusing, finding a subject, composing, taking the picture. Maybe you take it horizontally, maybe you take it vertically, okay? But that's the process with a still camera and a photographic lens, okay? Now that differs. In the years that followed after film sort of started waning and we went to digital cameras, the cameras started changing and looking a little different. Here's a Canon EOS. This is a 60D. Okay. A little bit different kind of ergonomic design. We went from manual focus to autofocus. And then in this case, it's also a digital camera. So there's no more film transport inside the camera. But there's still a viewfinder. And the process was still, you put your eye to the viewfinder, and this time the camera would focus for you in autofocus. If you had the camera set for autofocus, which I normally don't because I don't use autofocus, but if you did, the camera would focus by touch of the button. Okay. And then if you wanted to override that, you could, okay, but you didn't have to. And then for the first time, the digital cameras were offering what we called a live view on the back of the camera. So on the back of my film camera, the only thing I had in the days of shooting film was a little slot where I could put the box cover. Oh, I've covered it with Velcro. I could put the cover from the film box, just slide it in a little kind of tray on the back of the camera here to remind me what kind of film I had put inside the camera. Okay. But inside it's really, there's really not much to see. It's film transport. There is a curtain in here that opens and closes as the shutters release to expose the film to what your lens is seeing. And that's it, right? So, and then the digital cameras came along and eliminated the film, gave us autofocus, and in some cases automatic exposure. Okay, but the process was still, point, focus, shoot, recompose, point, focus, and shoot, point, focus, and shoot from the point of view of one operator. Well, now, as you're seeing, as we look at the film process, In week 1, we talked about how many people are in the camera department. So how many people have we got? We got a DP, right? We have maybe a separate camera operator. We have a first assistant, a second assistant, and we might also have a loader who is now a digital asset manager. And then we have a DIT, a digital imaging technician, to help us with our digital files. So we got 6 people in the camera department now. As a still photographer, it was just me. Sometimes you'd have an assistant, one assistant to go out and help you carry lights or extra gear or whatever. But most of the time it was just a one-man show, right? So those lenses had to suit that need. Now we're using digital cameras. I brought the Ursa Mini back for us to check out. And when we build it all out, like the girl has in this image here, she's got it all built out with an external monitor. She's got the EVF attached so she can look through in broad daylight. She's got the focus assist mounted to the camera. She's got a cinema lens on here. She's wearing a 14 mil right now. Looks like maybe a Sigma Cinema Prime. And this camera is built for a different kind of workflow. The camera operator is going to lens the shot through the viewfinder, look through the viewfinder, and compose and pan and tilt and follow the action through the viewfinder. The first assistant's going to follow the focus using the focus assist. Okay. The second AC is going to smack the sticks and wait for a camera reload. And then the asset manager is going to take the cards or the empty film mags as they're burned on set and reload them or download and copy the files. So there's a lot of folks working around the camera for a cinema camera, and those lenses are built for that kind of workflow, okay? And the 2 lenses are completely different. So if we were to compare these, we want to start looking at the differences and perhaps some of the reasons why cinema lenses are a little bit more rare and a little bit more expensive. Photographic versus cinema lenses. What the lens is designed to do, still lenses are designed for the photographer who has the ability to pause and reset and readjust, and they're working with less constraint on their time. Whereas the cinema camera, it has a different kind of schedule. There's a lot of things going on and the camera is rolling a lot. And we have to be able to control aspects of the lens and aspects of the camera, even while the camera is recording. Okay, so there's some adjustments we might want to make to the equipment during the actual shooting. The photographic camera is shooting 1 frame at a time. We're shooting 24 frames a second, and some of our clips or our takes can be as long as 3 or 4 minutes at a pop. So there are adjustments we want to make on the fly while the camera is rolling, like changes in focus, changes in exposure, okay, changes in camera position, okay. So all of those things have to be facilitated while using cinema lenses, okay. If I show you really quick a comparison of, this is the Rokinon 35 millimeter lens for still photography. I don't have one of those, but I do have the cinema version right here. Okay, and I'll show you, you can see there's going to be some differences. So on the 35 millimeter photographic lens, it's smaller, it's a little bit less durable, it's lighter weight, probably, not necessarily, but maybe. Ergonomically, it's slightly different, and it's going to have a specific optical quality. It'll be a high optical quality, but it may or may not be compatible with high resolution digital video. If you look at this image that I have on the screen right now, you can see there's kind of a rubber focus wheel, kind of similar to the one that's on this Sigma lens. It's designed to be adjusted by hand. So it's got a soft rubber focus wheel that's easy to manipulate, and it's not hard on your fingers. On the other hand, the Rokinon 35 millimeter cinema lens doesn't have that comfortable rubber hand grip. It has the 0.8 pitch lens gears instead, so that we can control the focus of this lens either by using a focus assist wheel like we have here, or a radio controlled focus control. If we're going to put a camera on a crane and it's going to go way up high in the air, we can't stand there and focus next to it with a focus wheel because it'll be 30 feet in the air. but we can do it with a radio controller, okay? In order for the radio controller to work, we have to have something for it to bite onto, and that's what the teeth on the lenses are for. Notice there's also teeth on the aperture ring, all right? So we're controlling the aperture in our lens, okay? We're setting it for exposure to a particular size, but let's say, for instance, you want to do a shot of a guy filling up his gas tank at a gas station, and he's outside filling up the gas. We're going to start shooting at the car, at the back of the car. He stops pumping the gas, puts the handle back in the machine, and now he's going to walk into the gas station and pay the attendant. And we want to roll on that the whole way. We got a steady cam going, the whole deal. We're going to follow him in from the gas pump into the gas station to pay the attendant. Well, the aperture we chose for shooting outside at the gas pump might be really small because it's bright outside. But then when we go into the gas station, why, we need to open up the lens to let a whole bunch of light in, because now we're inside and there's less available light. I got to be able to do that on the fly with a cinema lens. And I can do that because the cinema lenses have what we call a stepless aperture ring. Now, on a photographic camera, we have lenses. I'm going to show you 50 without the, well, actually, let me show you on the camera. I got a 50mm lens here, and you can see my aperture control ring is right here. When I turn that, it's changing the size of the aperture inside the lens at the point that I expose the camera, right? When I hit the shutter button, okay? So a still camera, obviously it's designed to work like this, right? I'm working like this, I'm focusing and I'm taking pictures. If I want to change my aperture and I don't want to take my eye away from the viewfinder, I can change my f-stops by listening for the clicks. And if I know that I was at, say, this lens goes from an f1.8 to a 16. If I know that I'm on an 8 and I want to go to a 4 outside without even looking, I can go 2, 2, 8, 4, and I know I'm at an f4, okay, on the top of the lens. I'm just listening for the clicks and feeling for the little ball bearing indent, okay? That's what a still photographic lens is designed to do. I can either look at the top of my camera and make my adjustments, or I can just count the clicks and listen without looking in case I don't want to miss the moment by taking my eye away from the viewfinder, right? So that's why still photographic lenses click when you change the f-stop. It's on purpose. It's not a mistake. It's not an inferior manufacturing design. It was intended to be that way. Now, some people will say, oh, this is, you know, because the Rokinon photographic 35mm is the same basic size as their cinema version, it just has a rubber or gears instead of a rubber hand grip, and it basically looks like the same lens. They say, oh, this lens has been declicked. And you see a lot of people on YouTube calling that a declicked f-stop. This is a cinema lens that was purpose built to work on a cinema camera. It was never clicked in the first place. Okay, it's a smooth f-stop, okay, with no indents. Okay, so it's you know, it's designed so I can roll it open and roll it closed, so I can change my f-stop on the fly, like I was just explaining to you. Okay, and the reason why it needs to be smooth like that is we don't want to hear those weird clicks when we're capturing the video, right? Because we'll hear it, especially if the microphone's very close to the lens. We'll hear those clicks and it would ruin our take. So it has to be smooth and silent, our ability to change this f-stop without hearing it on the video or on the audio, okay? And a still photographic lens might prohibit you from getting good audio, okay? So those are the main differences between the cinema lenses and the photographic lenses, but let's dig deeper and see what else we can find here that's different. So cinema lenses are purpose-built to have follow focuses attached to them. It's rare that you'll see somebody operating a cinema lens by hand because the gear, you know, the focus teeth, after a while, they might be a little hard on your fingers if you have sensitive hands. And they're not as easy to grip as the rubber grip on a photographic lens. And you've got these nice follow focus wheels that help you, you know, facilitate focus control. So it's rare that you would use a cinema lens without this. Now, there have been times in the past, once upon a time when we were using the film cameras, and the Panaflex film camera is a really big camera, okay? And if we were doing a shot like in the back seat of a car, maybe, you know, we might have to strip off the matte box, put a small 400-foot mag on the camera instead of the big 1,000-foot mag, and try to get the camera as physically small as we could in order to fit in the tight space like the back of a small sports car, let's say. And in that case, it might be too much to have the focus assist mounted on the camera as well, because it makes the camera too big to deal with in a small tight space. And we might take it off and focus a situation like that by hand. But otherwise, we had the thing fully built with the wheel and everything so that we could have precise control over that lens, because we had to do it while the camera was rolling. Okay, so that's really the major difference. There's a couple of others that I'll discuss here in a minute, but pulling focus is the primary reason that cinema lenses look like they do, and they're shaped like they do, like they are, and they are the size that they are. For instance, here is one of the Zines. This is a Zine 50mm lens. Okay, so who was it that had the Canon? Was it Alan that has the Canon Nifty 50? So here is the Zine 50mm lens. Okay, your Nifty 50 is pretty similar in size to my Olympus 50mm. Okay, not real big. And yet here's the Zine, and it's massive, right? Why is it massive? Well, it's for the focus ability of the lens. Okay, a follow focus mechanism is moving the focus wheel on our lens, right? The further this lens travels in its helicoil inside, on the Zine lens, you can see there's markings that are telling you how far your subject might be away, right? And look at all of those markings on there, especially when we're in the zone of, let's see, this one's really biased for about, say, 2.5 feet to about 6 feet. In between those two extremes, 2.5 and 6, here's my witness mark. Look at all those measurements. Okay, why do you suppose that is? Anybody want to take a shot at it? Talking
You
about
want
follow
to be
focus
really
now.
certain that you're getting the right focal length.
Well, the focal length is 50mm. That doesn't change. This is what we call
oh.
a prime lens. But the focus distance, we have all these choices in between 6 feet and 2.5 feet. Look at all those markings, all those laser etched markings. Here's 2.5 feet. Here's 2'3", and there's 6 feet way up there.
So you don't have to use like a tape measure, right?
No, you still
One
need
of
to use a tape measure, but look how far my hand is traveling to get from 6 feet to 2.3 feet and then back again. It's moving a long way, isn't it? That's so you get precise focus when you have actors that are anywhere from 2.5 feet to 6 feet away from the camera. And it just so happens that with a film camera and a 50mm lens, the average distance away that the subjects tend to be in a movie where we're getting medium close-ups, or what I call a loose close-up, is about 6 feet away on a 50mm lens. Sometimes the actors will move as close as 2.5 feet from the lens, especially if they walk up towards the lens into a big close-up, if they're delivering a really important line, you know. You see that a lot. You see it a lot in like war movies where the generals are talking and then one guy walks up closer to the lens to reveal some detail of what's going to happen next. And it's very important and we want to hear it. And he comes up in a big close-up, right? If that happens, we have to pull the focus from where they were standing at 6 feet to about 2.5 feet away. So that's the working average distance, anywhere from say 3 feet out as far as 8 feet. That's the average distance where we're doing most of our conversational coverage of dialogue. Okay. And we usually wear a 50mm lens when we do that. The reason why we wear a 50mm lens is because aside from the peripheral vision that our human eyes have, our basic field of view is about 50mm. The average human eye is looking in about 50mm, minus anything you see in your side eye. Okay, just this is 50mm. So when we use the 50mm on close-ups like that of people talking in conversation, we create, using a point of view that's similar to the human eye, we create a sense for the audience that they're a part of that conversation. Does that make sense? If we saw it on a telephoto lens, we were really far back and we were seeing the subjects in the same size, but we were using a telephoto lens, you would see something called field compression, which is a situation where the background appears much closer than it really is and very, very grossly out of focus on a telephoto lens. That doesn't happen on a 50mm lens, okay? So if we were to get way back and use that longer lens to photograph the same conversation at about this size, a loose close-up, with the background all blurry and out of focus, it's not an immersive field of view. It doesn't give you the sense of being part of that conversation. It gives you more a sense of eavesdropping on that conversation, because you know that you're further away than your normal eye perspective. But when we're on a wider angle lens, like a 50mm or a 35mm, and we're up close to our subjects, we immerse the audience with that point of view, and it kind of feels like these folks we're standing in a circle talking, right? So that's why we do those close-ups on 50mm lenses. Okay, so but the 50mm lens has all that travel on the focus wheel, so that if the subject moves, even like this, there's times when the subject will be standing there and they'll move maybe a foot closer and then a foot further away from the action, okay? When they do that, we want to be able to follow them on the lens. So we can do that, and we have all those markings to tell us. Because what we have here, the delineations are 6 feet. Let's go here. 6 feet, then 5.5 feet, then 4'9", then 4'3", then 4 feet, then 3'9", then 3'6", then 3'3", then 3 feet. Okay, the increments are very small because the adjustments are very small and very precise, right? And this is how we're going to keep these folks in perfect focus. And because we have all those markings to follow on the lens, it makes it very simple, if I'm the focus puller, to be looking at my lens barrel as I'm focusing it and see it change to those distances. And if I know by line of sight, or if I've taken a quick measurement with my tape and I know where 2.5 feet is, and I know where 3.5 feet is, and I know where 4.5 feet is, if I've seen that and I've got some kind of visual reference, or I put tape marks down, all I got to do is compare where the subject is standing to my tape marks or to my extended tape if it's out of the frame, and match the focus on the lens barrel to what I see happening in front of me. And I can keep all of that in focus, and I don't even have to be looking through the viewfinder. Okay, that's the tradecraft of pulling focus. That's what's going on with the first AC when they're working next to camera and the camera is rolling. Okay. So a focus throw is when I start on one focus plane, say the subject standing at 5 feet, and there's another subject. I used the example last night of in the James Bond film, Daniel Craig was looking at something through the what are these? The binoculars. And Felix, the CIA agent from the US, is standing behind him, and they're talking about what Bond is looking at through the binoculars. So in the frame, and I'm going to do this to my own laptop, in the frame, Bond is big in the foreground like this, looking through the binoculars, and a couple feet behind him, Felix is back there. Well, when we focus on James right here, Felix, even on a 50 at this kind of close relationship to the camera, Felix is going to be out of focus. So when Bond says something, we're focused here on these binoculars. And then when Felix says something, we throw the focus to Felix. And then Bond becomes out of focus in the foreground, and Felix, standing in the background, becomes in sharp focus. When we do that, we call that a focus throw. Okay. That's what a focus throw is. And then I'm going to show you a video representation of that here in a couple minutes.
Is that the same thing as rack focus?
Yes. Okay.
Okay, so
They
they're the same
call it,
thing.
yeah, they call it rack because you're going maybe from the minimum extreme to the maximum extreme, the full rack of the lens. Okay. You're racking forward and racking back. Okay. That's a rack focus or a focus throw. Okay.
Yeah, I know Fincher loves it, or Jeff Cronsworth, his DP, loves doing that.
Pardon me?
I know Fincher loves doing that shot.
Yeah.
Or
It
Jeff
has,
Cronsworth.
it has dramatic emphasis, right? This is part of the function of cinema, right? And how we control the audience's information flow. We manipulate their emotions, and we control what they get to see and what they don't get to see. We can either frame it out by panning away and hide details from the audience. We can buzz them out of focus, and so they can't determine what they're actually looking at until we bring it into focus or resolve the image, right? And a focus throw or a focus rack, a guy in the foreground, he might say something profound right here, or he might be looking through the binoculars going, what are they loading into that truck? And then we get a POV of what the binoculars are seeing, a really long lens shot of guys throwing cases into a nondescript black truck, right? And so Bond is going, what do you suppose they're loading into that truck? And he's sharp, right? Well, now Felix is going to respond. He might have the answer, but he's out of focus. So we'll throw the focus to Felix, and Felix will say, yes, those are the parts to the handheld Stinger missile that they're going to use to take down the jetliner in 2 days if we don't stop them. Oh, we just now created a moment of emphasis because we have a big in the foreground, something going on. We shift focus to the background, and we learn new information when we do that. Okay. And the audience is learning it as we reveal it to them in the form of that focus rack. Okay. And that can be, that can have a very dramatic effect on your audience. Okay. And there's lots of ways in which we can use that moment to create heightened drama, heightened anxiety, fear. You know, somebody standing in the foreground going, I wonder where the monster is, you know, on Alien, for instance, in the dark spaceship, and somebody's in the foreground going, oh no, they're looking at the blip, blip, blip thing, trying to figure out where the aliens are. Where could they possibly be? And then we throw focus to the background and we see the alien standing in the shadow, right? Oh no, but we didn't see it when it was out of focus. We were concentrating on what was happening in the foreground. And when we revealed it through resolving the focus, we created a heightened level of anxiety. Same kind of thing, okay? So the first AC is the person that's managing all of this while we're shooting, okay? So they're not just kind of standing next to the camera, you know, waiting to move it around or waiting to change lenses. They're actually doing something that I call riding the focus while the camera is rolling, okay? It's a very interesting job. It's a very difficult job, but once you learn how to do it, if you get very good at it and you work in Hollywood, you'll never want for a job, because there will always be a film taking place that wants a really good focus puller, somebody who's very accurate, works very quickly, has a very low-key presence on set, right? But is very knowledgeable and has a lot of experience. People like that in Hollywood will work as long as they want, and usually they make really good money because they're in demand. Okay. So it's a good thing to think about if you want a career in the camera department is whatever position that you take on, whether it's second AC, first AC, operator, be the best you can possibly be at that position and earn a reputation, because you might find that you'll always be working. There'll always be a phone call waiting for you to accept a job or turn it down. Okay, it's a good place to be. If you're just average at doing the job, then you'll probably move up very easily through the ranks, because, you know, most people that are in the camera department at some point would like to be either the camera operator or the DP. They don't want to stay the loader forever, unless they're known as the best loader in the industry. And then the best loader in the industry probably makes a ton of money because they're always working. And if you know, salary is your only concern, and you happen to be the best loader in Hollywood or the best second AC in Hollywood, then you're also a happy person. And it just so happens that I worked with a guy that I think was one of the best second ACs in Hollywood. And I worked with him when I was a young first assistant cameraman. And that was in about, 1994. I met Junior in 1994, and he was a second AC on a movie that I was doing. And he was working with a first AC named Jimmy. And Jimmy is, to this day, one of the marquee first ACs in Hollywood. Both of these guys were crackerjack. They were good at what they did. And I was surprised that years later, in like 2006, I think, I ran into Junior at a rental house in Los Angeles, and Junior was still a second AC. And, you know, I wasn't surprised because he was good way back when. And the fact that he was still a second AC in LA after, you know, 15 or so years that we had gone without seeing one another, I knew that he had ascended to the point where if there was a big movie going on, okay, there's a very short list of people that the producers are going to start calling, and they're generally the best people they could get. In other words, who are the best people that do this job? And that's a pretty short list. The next list is, who are, of all of the available people, who's best among the available people? Then that becomes a much bigger list. Junior and Jimmy were guys that were on the first list, the best in the business list. And that is a really cush place to be, because those guys never wanted for a job. They were always working. Junior's father was a key grip. Jimmy's father was a DP. But neither of those guys ever worked with their own family on movies because they were working with other crews. So it's pretty interesting. Okay, if you're going to use a still lens on a cinema camera, you can do it. Why would you do it? Okay, let's say you own that Canon T2i or T3i or that Canon T6. And let's say you've got a bag of lenses for it. But the camera is no longer suiting your client's needs anymore. For instance, say you got those Rebels, and the clients are starting to ask you for 4K footage. Well, you're not going to get that with the Rebel T3i, and you're not going to get that with the Rebel T6. You might get it with the Rebel T6i. I don't know if they get 4K in the Rebel series yet or not. But let's say you decide you're going to get out of the Canon camera platform altogether, and you're going to buy a Z-Cam, or you're going to buy, let's say you're going to buy one of these, you're going to buy a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, right? And you want to start shooting with something that'll give you 4K resolution and high frame rates and all of that. But you got all these lenses, and you're thinking to yourself, man, have I got to buy all new cinema lenses for the camera? Well, no, you don't have to. You can adapt your still photographic lenses to work on your cinema cameras. It's just a little problematic, but if you know what to do to get over the hump, you can modify your gear to save the investment right away, at least, until you're ready to transition into cinema glass. We call lenses glass. It's the hip term. All right. So when you're ready to buy cinema glass, you know, you do that. But until then, you make do with what you've got. In this image that I'm showing you here on the screen, this is an Arri Alexa camera. Okay. So here's the marquee Arri Alexa studio camera, the marquee Hollywood camera with a Canon 35-105 mounted to it. Okay. Why would you do that? Well, maybe this person finally got the money together. They've been working their butt off, and they finally got to a point where the client is always asking them to rent an Arri Alexa, and they decide, maybe I'll make more money if I actually buy an Alexa. And then when they hire me, I'll rent my Alexa to them on the shoot and will use my camera on the shoots that I'm working on. Makes a lot of sense. But once you buy a $60,000 cinema camera body, you don't have much money left over for cinema lenses. So you might want to use all your Canon L series glass to suffice for the time being until you can make more money and buy a set of cinema lenses. And that's totally fine. So in this case, they've put some stuff on the 35 to 105 to make it work with the Arri camera. One of the things they did, and we talked about this the other day, is they put a plastic lens gear on the outside of the still photographic lens to give you the teeth required for the follow focus to work. And they attached it to the rubber grip, okay, and attach it to the camera, and your follow focus now will link up to it, and you can work that. Oh, it's a 24 to 105. I'm sorry. You can work that lens very, very much like you would work the cinema lens. There's a few differences though. The still photographic lens, remember, that's designed to work with a one-man operation or a one-person operation. The Canon lenses in particular work in conjunction with the camera, and you'll get information like the f-stop you're using, exposure information and everything. You get that in the viewfinder of your Canon camera, okay? So the lenses for the Canon cameras generally don't have a whole lot of controls or markings on the outside. Well, that doesn't work with a cinema lens because you got a first AC that needs to know, where am I in the focus? Where's my f-stop? How do I change it, right? And you can't do that with the Canon lens, okay? So if the camera has a menu that'll control the lens inside through electronic linkage, that's great, all right? And the linkage is a set of contacts on the lens mount that transfer information from the lens to the camera, and the camera can control the diaphragm size electronically. But a lot of cinema cameras don't do that because cinema cameras are designed to work manually, okay? And so therefore the lenses, like here's a cinema zoom, for instance, there's no contacts on this lens mount. It's just a couple of bayonet flanges that are designed to connect to the camera. There is absolutely no communication between this lens and any camera that I would put it on. Okay, it's a cinema lens. If I want to know what's up with this lens, I look on the outside of the lens, and that's where I learn everything that's going on with this zoom lens. So this is a 20 to 70 millimeter cinema zoom lens by DZO. Okay, I can see my f-stops right here, or t-stops rather, I'm sorry. I'll explain to you what those are in a few minutes. Here's my zoom, here's my focal length adjustment, okay, from 20 millimeters wide angle to 70 millimeter telephoto. And here's my focus adjustment right here. And it's in US feet instead of European meters, okay? And it's got a lot of different markings for a lot of different distances on the lens barrel. You see that? Here's my 6 or 7 feet. Here's 7 feet, 6 foot and a half, 6, 5.5, 5, 4.5, 4.5, 4, 4, 3, 9, 3, 6, 3, 3, 3 feet. Okay. Just like the Zine 50 millimeter, I've got a lot of etchings on here to tell me exactly where I am on my focus throw, so that when I'm working the close-ups and the wide, you know, the loose close-ups, I have precise control over what this lens is seeing. Okay. Now look again at this 24 to 105. This little window on top of the camera, this is the only place we have any kind of clue what's going on inside this lens, other than the focal length adjustment wheel, which is here. Okay, that's fine. I need to know that information as well. But this is the precise focus, the focus readout in here. And you'll find that there are not nearly as many markings on this little readout as there are on my cinema zoom. Because the photographic zoom, remember, it's working autofocus with the camera, it's communicating electronically with the camera. This is really, the information in this window is really just for random verification or for, you know, for information, but it's not really designed to be relied upon for pulling focus. The information is just not there's not enough of it. You know, they give you a 20 foot measure infinity, which might be at 60 or 100 feet away. They're giving you a 10 foot. So there's two markings between 10 foot and 20 foot on this lens. On this lens between 10 and 20 feet, I've got, how many markings do I have? Here's 20 feet, 15 feet, 12 feet, 15 feet. And the amount of space I have between those is quite a bit. So if I have a subject that is at 11 feet, that's about there. 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 feet, right? I've got all that room in there to make a precise adjustment on this lens. And if for some reason the subject stops in between one of those markings, I can take my grease pencil and I can mark it. So where did the subject stop? Well, they stopped at, let's say they stopped at 17 feet, which is about there. Okay. I can take my grease pencil, put a little mark at 17 feet that I can see while I'm pulling focus. Okay. See my little grease mark right there? And I know to stop the focus wheel right there when the subject stops at 17 feet away. Okay, so I can mark this lens. I got enough room to do that. And I got enough room to sort of guesstimate what's happening between 10 feet and 20 feet. On this Canon zoom lens, there looks to be about 1/4 or 3/8 of an inch between those two markings. I have no precision control over this lens. It's gonna be very difficult to have precise control over the focus with a photographic lens. It's just not built for that kind of work. Okay. So we put the follow focus ring on the lens. We use our follow focus control, which I showed you the other day. Here it is again. Here's my follow focus off of the Ursa Mini. Okay. So here's my little control wheel. As I turn the big wheel, the small wheel turns, and that's what turns the focus wheel on the lens. Okay. I have the dry erase wheel on the outside, so I can take any focus information, like on this photo right here. Any focus information that's on the lens, I can transfer to my dry erase wheel. So if for some reason I've got a lens mounted on the camera, but I can't see the barrel of the lens, but I can see my focus wheel, and I have my markings transcribed onto here, I can still focus and be accurate with my follow focus wheel, as long as I have accurately transferred the markings from the lens to the wheel. Okay. And then when the shot changes, I wipe it all off with a rag and start again. Okay. So it's a pretty good system, and it's designed to work this way. It's designed to have multiple operators around the camera all at one time. I'm going to pop that 50 back on here now. So remember, I'm going to line up my red dots. Where's my red dot here? It's over here. Okay. At about 10 o'clock on the dial. And I got my red dot at 12 o'clock on the camera. I'm just going to line those red dots up, dock it like the space station, and then wait for the click. And it's mounted on there. And then I'll just make sure my focus gears on the lens line up with my focus wheel. I'm going to set the lens to infinity. And then I'm going to push these two parts together. Just like that, to get them to work together. Okay. It's probably hard to see on the little tiny thumbnail, but the lens is turning, so everything's working really well. Okay. This is the First AC's stock and trade. If you can work with this system and you can focus on the fly like we're doing with cinema cameras, you're going to have a good career as a camera assistant. Okay. All right. Hard stops. What are they? On a photographic lens, like a lens that goes on the Canon T3i, let's say, the manual focus ring turns and we see the focus distances change in the little window, right? But I can turn this lens, and when the lens gets to infinity, I can still turn the focus ring. It's still turning. So this is a really hard thing to use on a cinema camera, because if I'm not looking at the lens barrel and verifying the footage in the little window here, which is very small and on the top of a photographic lens, not on the side at the very least where my job has conditioned me to look for information, it's not even in the right place, being up here, hard to see. Okay. If I had the viewfinder, the EVF on the camera, it'd be blocking this window anyway, and I wouldn't be able to tell where the lens was focused at all. And then the fact that the wheel spins beyond the minimum and maximum focusing distances gives me no sense of touch at all with this lens on the cinema camera. So a cinema lens is going to have a hard stop. So when I get to infinity on this lens, it's going to stop and doesn't go beyond the maximum focusing distance of infinity. And vice versa. When I go all the way around to minimum focus, it stops again. And there's a hard stop there. So I know where minimum and maximum are on this lens, okay? Even without looking at it, I know where they are, okay? And so much about the focus puller's job is ergonomic and by feel. If I have no hard stops on my lens, I don't know where my focus field begins and ends. It just keeps going around and around and around. The still camera knows, because the still lens, the still photographic lens, is communicating with the camera through these contacts. And it's telling the camera internally where it is in terms of the focus field. But by looking at the lens, I have no idea. Okay. And that's a bad place to be if you're a focus puller on a movie set, relying on seeing your information here. So all the cinema lenses are going to be designed to have all the information you need to know right on the side of the lens barrel, where you can see it very quickly and understand immediately upon a glance what this lens is adjusted to do. Okay. So cinema lenses have everything you need to know on the outside. Okay. Which is another benefit that you don't have with a photographic lens. Iris smoothness. I talked about that a little bit in the beginning of the lecture. So do I want the smooth moving iris that changes very, very gradually and very smoothly without making a sound, so that I can roll that stop open or closed in the middle of a shot? Or does it click and is it obnoxiously making noise? Okay. Photographic lenses can be declicked. Okay. All that's happening is there's two wheels that turn together, and there's indents in the metal, and there's a ball bearing in there, and it drops into place with each new setting on the iris. Okay. It'll click into place. So what they'll do is you can do this yourself in many cases, or have it done by a repair center like Duclos Lenses in Los Angeles. They'll take a photographic lens with a manual aperture that gets clicking, and they'll just take the bearing out of it so it doesn't make any noise anymore, and then it'll move smoothly, just like your cinema lens, okay? But a lens like this is purpose-built to operate this way from the very beginning, okay? And so even the cinema lens, you'll notice how I have a range of f-stops on this lens, and they take up a little bit of real estate on the T-stop ring. I have to move it a full quarter turn to get from minimum to maximum. On my little 50 millimeter, that's it. It's not really the same range of motion. And so again, I'm a little bit restricted just by the ergonomics of the photographic lens over the cinema lens. Okay. Ergonomically, I like the way the cinema lens feels. Now I've got two lenses here. I got two of the same lenses by Tokina. Here is the Tokina 11-16 photographic zoom, okay? It's got focal length adjustment here, and it's got focus adjustment here, and it's got a clutch. If I'm using it on a Canon photographic camera in autofocus, this lens just turns and it has no tactile relationship to what's going on inside at all. The clutch releases and this just spins, okay? But when I want to be in manual focus, I have to engage the clutch like so. And now when I turn it, you can see the focus scale inside is moving and changing, okay? And then it's designed to talk electronically to my Canon cameras, okay? Well, this is a nice lens. This is a nice point of view. It's very wide. So this is like your elevator lens, your inside the walk-in closet lens, your phone booth lens, your inside the car driving down the road lens. It's got a lot of flexibility at very wide angles, but it's a photographic lens and it leaves me in the dark a lot of the time about what's going on here if I have this on a manual camera. So there's a Tokina cinema version of the same lens. And it's pretty similar to its photographic counterpart. It's a little bit bigger physically because the lens is made out of some bigger components. It's about the same size, a little bit bigger in diameter, a little bit, okay? And that's like to give you a little bit longer gear ratio in terms of your focus throw from minimum to maximum, okay? But look at the barrel on the outside. Look at all that information I have in terms of where my lens is set for focus. Here's my focal length ring, and I have an f-stop ring on the cinema version. So I can change my f-stop from the outside on the fly, and it's very smooth and stepless, okay? And each one of these rings has a 0.8 pitch gear on it, so I can use my follow focus. I don't have to attach any surplus parts to this lens, do anything to it. It still has a Canon EF mount. It even has contacts on here. This is, in the case of this lens, it's not to autofocus the lens on a Canon camera. This is passing focal length and focus metadata to the processor that becomes part of the image file. Okay, so this is for metadata only, whereas these contacts on the photographic lens are for controlling the lens by the camera, okay, and for metadata, okay? So that's the difference between both from the same manufacturer. One's a photographic lens, one's a cinema lens, okay? I could get this to work, but again, it would be a little bit of a pain versus this one, which is built the way I need it to work, okay? All right, let's move on. Okay. This is about, I've got a couple of little quick GIFs right here. This one is showing you how quickly a photographic lens will focus versus a cinema lens. So remember I told you the amount of travel of the focus wheel on a manual lens is very short, and on a cinema lens it's a lot longer. That's so you can have dramatic changes in focus. Now, they're going to compare an ingenue cinema zoom to a Canon photographic zoom. And if you can see it, you got this little aloe plant in the foreground, and we got this cactus in the background. And I'm going to hit play, and you're going to see them throw the focus from the aloe to the cactus and then back again. On the ingenue, it's going to take about 3 times longer than on the Canon zoom. Watch this. It's about a 3-second pull from the foreground to the background. Now the Canon lens, 24 to 70, boom. It's about 1.5 seconds. So it's 2 to 1. It's twice as long on the cinema zoom. Here's the Canon lens with the focus scale on the top. And then on the ingenue, obviously, you've got your focus scale in plain view on the side of the lens. So the AC standing there knows all the information, okay? So this is an ergonomic thing. I mean, the focus puller is standing there and they've got a hard job. The job is hard enough already without guessing, you know. So the gear, all the gear is designed to make that job easier. Bigger front lens mouths on these cinema lenses give you inherently more focus travel on the focus wheel of the lens. It's like the big gear and the little gear on your 10-speed bike. Okay, the little gear gets you faster with more effort. The big gear gets you there, but it's slower with less effort, right? So it's like a gear ratio on a bicycle. Okay, the wider the barrel, even though these are both 50 millimeters, the wide barrel is focusing a lot slower, giving me more incremental room to precisely focus. And the small lens is like the small gear on your bike. It'll get you there a lot quicker. Okay, if you're shooting one frame at a time. So if I'm shooting sports, right, and I want to capture just the right moment, I want to be able to throw that lens into focus very quickly and snap the shutter. Okay, that's not how we work when we make films. When we make films, everything is very deliberate, very precise, timed out. Okay, and so the tools are designed to do that for us. Focus breathing is another aspect of a photographic lens that can be reduced through designs, optical designs in a cinema lens. What is focus breathing? Let me show you first what it is, and then let me explain to you what's happening. Here is a quick clip of focus breathing. Watch what happens. There's an object in the background, there's an object in the middle ground, and then there's an object in the foreground. The foreground is clearly a coffee mug. Okay. The middle ground, I think it's a pencil holder, cup holder with some stuff in it. And then in the background, there's something, I'm not sure what it is, maybe a baby monitor or something. And they're going to throw the focus from the coffee cup to this object in the background and then back again. Okay, and watch what happens to this object in the background as it becomes more and more in focus. Do you see it changing size? When it's fully out of focus, it's this big white blob. And as it gets sharper, the blob resolves into a tighter, more focused image of something back there. The difference in size of the state of that object in focus and out of focus is giving the image the illusion that it's breathing. That's where we get the term focus breathing from. Okay. This can be a very distracting aspect of a cinematic image. If you were throwing focus from the coffee mug to, I don't even know what this thing is, this object, I don't even know what that is. Whatever it is, if we were throwing focus from the mug to that object in the background and then back again, it could be distracting. Look, the mug is changing size too. It gets a lot smaller when it's out of focus and a lot bigger when it's in focus. It's actually changing size in the foreground. If that was a person's face and we were covering a conversation between these two individuals, the person in the back and the person in the foreground, that could be very, very distracting. Now, that distraction could create anxiety, which works for you and works for your script. But if it's a dramatic talking head think piece where you don't want to distract the audience with superfluous visuals and you want them to focus on dialogue, this could be a very disruptive aspect of your imagery. Okay. This is a photographic lens, and breathing is very pronounced in photographic lenses. In cinema lenses, they build these lenses specifically with enough optics to control the way light is bent and reconfigured inside the lens, that the images don't change size as they resolve from out of focus to in focus. Okay. But as a result, it's a very expensive design process, which drives up the cost of a cinema lens. That's why this 50 millimeter lens will cost you about $2,000 retail. And you can get this 50 millimeter lens for about $150 retail. Okay. Because the amount of design science going into this 50 millimeter lens is easier and more mass producible than this lens, okay? Where they might make, let me look at the serial number on this guy. This is like number, oh, there it is. Number 3,810,386 in the run of 50mm lenses from Olympus in the year this was made, I think was 1986. Okay. 3 million, almost 4 million, almost 4 million lenses were made in this production run of 50mm. The serial number on this guy is a lot lower. Let's see if I can figure out what it is here. Oops. Come on there, fella. Come on off there, big guy. Well, that's not good. There we go. Huh. That's strange. It's worn down so much the lens turned beyond where it was supposed to stop. This one, serial number. We don't have it. That's strange. Should be on here somewhere. Well, I guarantee you they're not making 4 million of these in a production run out at Rokinon. Okay, they might make 50,000 of these. Okay, so the cost of manufacturing of this lens is much higher than the cost of manufacture that little Olympus 50mm. I'm not going to put this back on the camera because now I'm worried about this lens flange being worn out and being able to get that thing off. Okay. So focus breathing is kind of an odd concept. Is there anybody that's not clear about what's happening here? Is it fairly self-explanatory?
Why does the camera focus breathe? Like what specific thing in the lens causes this to happen?
It's just the optics. If I can go to my optics diagram here, it might be easier to explain. So here is the internal optical configuration of a 50mm lens from Carl Zeiss, designed in 1927. It has 6 elements inside on either side of the diaphragm, 6 elements of glass, okay? As you focus a lens, notice, for instance, I need a lens that is, yeah, here we go. Here's a Carl Zeiss 25mm lens, okay? If I focus on infinity, the lens is as compact as it's going to get, but as I focus out to minimum, I don't know if you can see it, but the front element is extending further and further out from the body. That means that inside the lens, the elements are expanding, including more airspace between them to magnify. You ever use a magnifying glass and hold it to your eye? If you're really close, the magnifying glass is close to your eye, and the further you get away from whatever you're looking at, a bug, let's say, the glass gets further away from your eye as the distance increases between your eye and the bug, to the point where it might be halfway. You come way out here at 2 feet and the magnifying glass is about halfway out, and you still see the bug, and the bug is getting bigger and bigger and bigger as this is happening, because the focal distance between the magnifying glass, the bug, and your eye is increasing. And as the focal distance increases, if you can resolve it, the image will appear much bigger. It'll appear magnified. Okay. Well, when the lens is focusing, the elements are moving like this inside, right? The groups are moving and the individual lenses are moving. And as they move, it can increase the size of the image. And as you resolve it, it appears to be changing size as it goes from in focus to out of focus and back again. So the only way to fix that is to add more elements of glass, and the optical arrangement becomes more and more complex. If you're adding more elements of glass, you're adding to the manufacturing process, which is adding to the cost of the lens, which is why cinema lenses are more expensive than photographic lenses. If you want to reduce focus breathing, you have to design a lens that has more optical components inside to reduce the amount of expansion of the image when it goes out of focus and back in focus. Does that make sense?
So it's almost like a slight change in the focal length of the lens when you're changing the distance that the object is being focused on.
That's exactly what's happening, Marcus. That's where we get the term focal length from. It's the distance, the point of convergence inside. Okay, there's a point where the image is upside down and backwards, and then the lenses change that back around as it gets to the sensor. In the middle of the optical center of the lens somewhere, the light rays will converge and actually cross and go from right side up to upside down, and then maybe back again, depending on how many groupings are in there and what kind of camera you're using. Okay, so that point of convergence changes from the image plane, which might be a sheet of film or a roll of film or an image sensor, and that optical center and the subject, as the subject to camera relationship changes, that focal length changes inside the lens. And the measurement is in millimeters. That's where we get 50 millimeters, 100 millimeters, 25 millimeters. If you could measure the distance of travel of all those elements and groupings inside the lens barrel, it would be 25 millimeters or 50 millimeters or 100 millimeters. Okay, so that's where all of this is coming from. So it's really interesting that you made that conclusion, because that's exactly what's happening. Okay, we understand the relationship as numbers that represent a perception of magnification that we associate with an image in a close-up or a wide angle. Okay, but there's really much more going on than that. But the cameras and their design and the way they're designed to function, we've been alleviated of worrying about a lot of that. One of the ways that I really came to understand this process and what's happening was when I had what was called a large format sheet film camera. I had a 4x5 field camera, which shot a piece of film that was literally this big. The frame was this big. Okay, the frame that you shoot in your still camera is 36 millimeters long, 24 millimeters high. It's a tiny square like the size of a postage stamp. The frame size in my 4x5 was this big, and all it was a compendium bellows, and it was two standards. One held a lens and the other held a film holder, and it was black and dark inside. And as you adjusted the lens, and then as you changed the spacing between the standards, the image would go in or out of focus based on what lens you had on there. And the distance of the standards was directly related to the magnification of the lens that you were wearing. Okay. And then when you shoot with a 4x5 camera or an 8x10 camera, optically, you understand the whole ecosystem of a photographic camera in the simplest terms: a piece of film, a lens, two standards, and a bellows in between that'll keep the light out so that we can actually create an image. And then the spacing and the distance between them and what happens to your image. In focus, out of focus, right? Perfectly linear or angular, okay, in terms of wide angle perspective. If you're looking at a room and it's very wide and you want to correct the vertical lines so they don't look like they're falling away, you change the relationship of the standards one to the other, both rise and fall, and then like so. And you can actually change the perspective point of view of what the lens is seeing by changing the relationship of the distance and the position of the standards. Large format photography will teach you things about photographic principles and the physics of photography that you never thought you would understand in a million years. It's a very interesting field to work in, but unfortunately, in the age of digital, those cameras are fairly out of fashion. They're a lot of work. They're very big and clumsy to use. But man, if you really want to understand how lenses work and how focus works, shoot with a 4x5 camera. It'll teach you, it'll give you a graduate level degree in photography. Okay, so we got to the point of the show where I want to talk to you about T-stops and f-stops. Okay, I'm going to talk to you more about stops, F's or T's, when we talk about exposure. But basically, suffice it to say, where's my zine? Inside the lens, we have a diaphragm. Can you see that? I'm trying to catch a little light on it. You can certainly see it opening and closing, right? So this is your diaphragm, and it creates what's called an iris, and the iris opens and closes to a particular size. Okay, and what that's doing is it's helping us increase or decrease the zone of focus around our subject. Okay, did you ever squint to see a street sign when you're driving? Okay, think of your iris as squinting, so you'll see more detail through a smaller hole. The lens is squinting, and then through a wider hole. That's what happens when you step into a really dark room and your pupils dilate. The f-stop is dilating in a room where there's not a lot of light. And this is how we can control our exposure balance on our image so that it's not too dark and not too bright, is by controlling the size of the hole, the size of the aperture in our lens. And that is corresponding to these numbers on the outside. Okay. So these numbers on the outside are representative of a measurement. It's a calculation that's been made about this lens and about these different sizes relative to the physical size of the optics that are being used. Like in the case of my Biotar down here on the presentation, the front lens, the one on the outside, is called the objective. The size of the objective divided into the focal length will give you mathematically these f numbers. Okay, and the focal length is technically going to change with things like focus, right? So when we adjust our f-stops, okay, we calculate roughly this half of the exposure solution, and the rest of it is determined by our frame rate and the speed in which our camera shutter opens and closes, and the sensitivity of our media, whether it's film or digital media, the sensitivity rating of that media. When we calculate all those things together, we get exposures. Okay, we're going to talk about exposures in about 3 weeks. Okay, but suffice it to say, you can calculate mathematically what these numbers represent, or you can physically measure the amount of light going through the lens and compare it to these measurements and run it through the formula and develop a series of numbers here that look almost like f-stops. They're very close to f-stops, but they're called t-stops. F-stops means you calculated this information by a formula, F formula. T-stops means you calculated this range of numbers by measuring the transmission of light that goes through the lens. Transmission stops, T-stops. One is just a more accurate way of measuring light coming through this lens, okay, and one is an estimate. All right, cinema lenses are all listed in T-stops. And here's the reason why in a nutshell. If you were to compare a series of shots done with photographic lenses of, say, different focal lengths, 50 millimeter, 85 millimeter, 35 millimeter, and you set each one of those lenses to f4 at a 60th of a second with a film stock that was rated at 100 ISO, and you took a picture, and with the 50 millimeter lens, the picture looked perfectly balanced, not too bright, not too dark. But you look at the result with the 35 millimeter lens and it looks a little different, maybe a little bit brighter. And you look at the shot made with the 100 millimeter lens and it looks just slightly darker than the 50 millimeter. Why is that? Because of the spaces between the glass elements and the focal lengths of the lenses had an effect on the amount of light that passed through the lens. And because each one of those lenses was slightly different, the exposure solution looked slightly different in the final analysis. Okay. That's no good on a movie set. If you're shooting somebody in a loose close-up and then you want to shoot them in a tighter close-up and you switch from a 50mm lens to a 135 and you don't check your exposure and you use f-stops, this close-up might end up too dark. All right. But if you use lenses that are measured in t-stops and you calculate this shot requires a T4 at a 50mm lens, and then you change to the 135 and set it to T4, the images will both be the same brightness. And the reason is because both of those lenses have been calibrated to measure the amount of light coming through and arrive at your diaphragm setting versus calculating it through a formula. Okay. So if you're shooting coverage of a conversation between two people and you're changing the sizes from wides to mediums to tights and back and forth and all over as they talk and divulge important details about the script, and you're changing all those sizes, you've either got to be constantly readjusting the camera to make sure that it's balanced with the lighting, or use lenses with T-stops, and you can use the same stop through all those different lens sizes and never have to worry about the exposure changing at all. Okay, that's really what that's about. It's designed to make it easier for us to work through our series of shots we need for coverage of a scene without having to constantly recheck our lights and recheck our camera and make sure everything's perfectly balanced. We can make the exposure calculation once, and as long as the lighting doesn't change and the position of the camera doesn't change relative to the subject, if all we're doing is changing lenses to make them narrower or wider, we don't have to recalculate exposure. Does that make sense? If you're using T-stops, if you're using f-stops, that can go out the window. Okay. So cinematographers and people that are making movies where time is of the essence, actors are very expensive, the crew is very expensive, and it's complex logistically. Things like cinematic equipment can make our lives a lot easier by making the job a little bit easier. And even if it's only slightly easier, that can mean a lot on a complicated production. I could have shown you this. This is focal distance right here. This is your objective, the size of the objective, and then the focal length. If you use this formula, N equals F divided by D, that'll give you F numbers on a scale. Okay. This is how we do it. It's a calculation, nothing more. There's nothing mysterious about it. This is how you would calculate for T-stops if you wanted to do it mathematically. If you want to impress your mathematics professor and show them the T-stop formula, they'll be wondering what I'm doing to you guys in cinematography class. But this is it. This is how you calculate for it. It's the example of an f2 lens with a transmittance of only 75% efficiency because the elements have expanded during focus, and it has a T-stop of 2.3 as a result, not 2. So the F number was 2.0, but the T number was 2.3. 2.3 is the more accurate measurement. If we base our exposures on 2.3, we'll always be exactly correct without needing any post-production correction. Okay. This little video I'm going to encourage you guys to watch on your own. It's a fellow named Matt Granger. He's got a lot of photo how-to videos on YouTube. He's a nice guy. And he did this little video, f-stops versus t-stops. And it kind of gives you his perspective on what the difference between those two things are. Check it out. It's only about 4 minutes, 5 minutes long. I put the link in web courses for you under videos. So right after the lecture page, the videos page, I've got a few things for you to look at. I've got some videos for you to look at about focus pulling, focus throws. Hazel, you asked me for some examples of focus throws. There's some videos in there you can look at. This video on T-stops is also in there. Check them out. It won't take you very long. You can probably watch them all in under an hour. The last thing I want to talk to you about is how these lenses mount to the cameras. Now, you noticed I had a problem getting that 50mm lens off a couple of minutes ago. These lenses attach in a variety of different ways depending on the manufacturer and the style of camera. Okay, so my Olympus film camera, for instance, This is what we used to call in the old days a bayonet mount. Okay, so in other words, there's a release button, you push it and turn the lens counterclockwise, and it comes right off the body. Okay, and when you want to put it back on, you do the same thing you do on the Ursa Mini. You line up the red dots, and the red dots, you dock them like the space station, turn it and wait for the click, and it's mounted to the camera. Okay, so that's kind of a push and twist, kind of a camming locking solution, okay, on the still photographic camera. The digital generation worked pretty much the same way. We got a release button down here on the Canon, turn everything, and it's also got a bayonet mount on it. Okay, basically the same system. If it works, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? This system has been working for decades. Okay, the first SLR cameras were designed in 1952, and the lenses have been mounting the same way ever since. Okay, they used to screw on the front of cameras, and cameras made before 1952. Okay, and at 52, when we were taking lenses on and off and changing perspectives and magnifications, and that was a routine thing that photographers were doing, they needed a better system than screwing the lens onto the front of the camera because it takes too long, right? And then what can you do when you're screwing two things together if you're not being real careful? You can cross thread them, you can strip them, right? So the last thing you want to do is like cross thread your lens and you don't get it all the way on and then you can't get it off. Now your camera is worthless and you're in the field photographing an event for the newspaper and you're screwed, right? So the Bayonet system was developed so photographers could take lenses on and off very quickly. It works pretty well. You do it enough times though, and the flanges start wearing out and you get a problem like I just had here where the lens was kind of spinning in the mount and it wouldn't come out. So I'm going to have them look at this and maybe have it repaired. But we're still doing it. Here's a modern Canon lens with the bayonet flanges on there. You can see them. They're just little tabs, and they there's a mirror image set of holes on the front of the lens port. It's called a lens port. Okay, and it just lines up and clicks into place. Some of these lenses use the bayonet twist and click method, and here's two right here. Here's a Canon EF lens mount, or lens flange, it might be called, with the electronic contacts. Here's one for Nikon. Same basic idea. Here's the electronic contacts on the Nikon. All right, but they're basically line them up, dock them, click them, and lock them into place. The other style of mount that we used to use, like on the Panaflex film cameras, is what was called a PL mount. And I used to think that meant, Panavision lens, but it's just positive locking mount, PL mount, okay? Aeroflex had the same thing basically for their cameras. And you can see how instead of having 3 bayonet flanges on a still photographic lens, all right, here's my cinema zoom, and it's pretty heavy, right? And then my photographic zoom, which is smaller and lighter. So 3 flanges might be okay on a lens this size, but I might want 4 on my cinema lens to make sure it doesn't plop off the front of my camera if we're moving fast and working hard, right? So they put PL mounts on the cinema lenses in the film era. Since we've moved to digital cameras, and since a lot of folks that were using Canon and Nikon equipment, especially if they were photographers who transitioned into filmmaking when digital became prolific, and we had so many photographic lenses transitioning onto video cameras, you started seeing video cameras appearing with still photographic lens mounts on them. Like this one, the Ursa Mini has a Canon EF mount on it, not a PL mount. You can get this camera with a PL mount. So if I was a cameraman who still had lenses left over from the film days, because lenses can be very expensive, cinema zooms can cost you upwards of $60,000, $70,000 a piece. So let's say I had a couple of cinema zooms that I used to use on my film camera. Now I want to use them on my Ursa Mini. Well, I could have ordered this with a PL mount, okay? But since I don't own any cinema zooms from that era, the zooms that I have now, I order them, buy them brand new with Canon EF mounts on them, because a lot of the new digital cameras have Canon EF mounts native to their build. So I buy lenses with EF mounts on them. And a Canon EF mount, just because it's designed to work on a Canon camera, doesn't mean I can't put this Canon EF cinema lens on a Z camera or on a Sony FS5 or on a Blackmagic camera with a micro four thirds lens flange. I can put this lens on any of those cameras through the use of an adapter. So here's a lens flange adapter. And this particular one, you see how it says EOS to M4 thirds? M43 or M4 thirds or micro four thirds is the lens flange that's on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera. So here's a Blackmagic Cinema camera, and here's a Blackmagic Cinema camera. This one has a native Canon EF flange on it, and this one has a micro four thirds native EF flange on it. So for this camera, I buy lenses with micro four thirds mounts on them. But if I wanted to put this Rokinon 35 millimeter on my Pocket Cinema camera, I'm going to have to adapt it because the flange on this is bigger than the flange on my Pocket Cinema camera. I got to adapt it. Easy to do. All I do is I put my adapter on my Rokinon lens like so. Line up the dots, pop it on. All right, now I've just put the lens flange adapter on here and I've turned this EF lens into a micro four thirds lens. Now I can mount this on my Pocket Cinema camera. Real easy. Same way I would mount any other. Line up the red dots, dock it like the space station, turn it till it clicks. And now the Rokinon with the Canon flange is on my Blackmagic Cinema camera with the micro four thirds body flange. Okay, all I did was use a lens adapter to make that work. Some lens adapters are deeper than others. I've got a lens adapter over here that's designed to take a here's a Zeiss 50 millimeter photographic lens, and I have it with this really thin adapter on here designed to change the native mount, which is Yashica contacts on this Zeiss lens, and make it fit on a Canon EF camera or a camera with a Canon EF flange. And I just line up the red dots again, turn it till it clicks, and I've just converted this lens flange to Canon EF from Yashica. And now I can use this Zeiss 50 millimeter lens on my Pocket Cinema camera if I wanted to. Or I could use it on the Ursa Mini with the EF flange. It's kind of silly, but I'll show you what it looks like. You got this big Ursa Mini camera body, and you got this little photographic lens on here. It fits and it will work. It will focus and it will perform, right? It's got f-stops that click though, because it's a photographic lens. But if you want to use a legendary optic like the Zeiss 50 millimeter lens, the optical formula for this lens right here was designed in 1855. Okay, and it has changed very little in that amount of time. So if you were to buy today a modern Zeiss 50 millimeter photographic lens, if it was also a 1.4, this is a 50 millimeter f1.4 lens, the optical design of that lens internally would be the same in 2021 as it was in 1855. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? It just so happens that this is part of a series of lenses that are legendary for their sharpness and contrast and color accuracy. It's called the Zeiss T-Star optics. These are very famous optics, and they were introduced in, I think it was 1982. The T-Star coating formula was developed by Zeiss in Germany. And when it's applied to these lenses, it reduces flaring, It reduces chromatic aberration. Don't worry about what that is. But in essence, it makes these lenses extremely sharp. And the accuracy of color reproduction of these lenses, there's no color bias in these lenses. Some lenses you shoot through them and the images look slightly warm. Some lenses you shoot through them and the images look slightly cool. When you shoot through these lenses, they are 100% lab accurate and extremely sharp. And these lenses have a reputation for excellence in the industry, photographic or video. A lot of digital video cinematographers are getting these old vintage Zeiss lenses and converting them to be used on their digital cinema cameras today because of these optics. And this is something you can do through adapters. So if you want to do it, and if you don't mind the logistics of modifying the still lens to work on the cinema camera, you can shoot through legendary optics like that. If you like the look and your client likes the look, let's say you're shooting a cosmetic commercial and the client insists that you shoot on Zeiss lenses. Well, a set of Zeiss cinema primes are very expensive to rent and they are nosebleed expensive to buy, right? A set of Zeiss cinema lenses to buy is over 100 grand, okay? To rent them, you know, they're going to cost you maybe 5,000 a week to rent, okay, for a set of lenses. So, you know, you're not going to supply your client with expensive Zeiss cinema lenses, but you might have a set of these that you acquired for a reasonable amount of money, modify them to work on your digital cinema camera, and they will look every bit as good as the Zeiss cinema glass. But you got to deal with the size. You got to deal with the clicked f-stop. You got to deal with the small focus ring. There's some things you got to deal with to accommodate this lens. But if you don't mind, the images it can generate are every bit as good as the ultra primes from Zeiss. Okay, they're every bit as good. And if you compare video back and forth, and you can do this on YouTube, there's guys on YouTube that have shot stuff through the ultra primes and shot stuff through the Zeiss lenses, and they go, you tell me which lens did what. And you look at the two images side by side and you cannot tell. You can't tell. So why would you get the expensive lenses? Because they are designed for what we do. And if you're working in the industry and you're working a lot and you're always renting your equipment out, the gear will pay for itself through rentals. So if you're in the business of being a cameraman, it's worth it for you to own the more expensive glass because it'll pay for itself in the long run. And this anxiety will be eliminated from your daily workflow. And sometimes that means a lot more than saving a little bit of money on the cost of the gear, okay? It all depends on how you're working, how often you're working, and what your clients are like, okay? What kind of gear you're ultimately gonna use. But in the beginning, when you're poor and you're not working a lot and you ain't got no money, these work great and they look beautiful. And if you can do good looking work with these, you're gonna get hired regardless of whether they even knew you were working this way or not. Because in the final analysis, the only thing that matters is what ends up on the screen. And if what ends up on the screen looks good, you're hired, okay? That's an important thing to remember about any of this, all of this. It's all, you know, in the end, you can mince this any way you want, okay? And carve it up any way you want and justify whatever you want. But at the end of the day, if your stuff looks good on the screen, you're gonna get work, okay? It's as simple as that. Okay, so that's it. I already talked to you about this. This was for your shooting assignment. I've given you these thumbnails to guide your shot sizes for the shooting assignment, and they are embedded in the assignment page. So we don't have to give this any more time. But here is your assignment for this week. You got some reading to do. I've chosen a section of the Camera Assistance Manual, Chapter 4. It's about taking focus measurements and follow focus work as an AC. And then I've given you a PDF. It's called The Anatomy of a Storyboard. Storyboards are basically artist renderings of the frames we might shoot when we go out and shoot a job. Okay, and they arrange them on a board and we can look at them sequentially and we can get a sense of how we need to capture the images on video for our movie, our television show, our commercial, whatever it is. So it's an explanation from a storyboard artist's point of view, what the different frame sizes look like, okay? And explanations about what they are, what they're called. It's something that I go into a little bit later in the semester when we talk about composition and framing. I'm giving it to you now to initiate the conversation, excuse me, because your homework assignment requires that you know a little bit about this. So I'm giving you some information now. We'll keep having this conversation throughout the semester. So it's not going to be the first or last time that you hear this information, okay? Just try to absorb it, use it to get your assignment done, and then don't worry about it until we cover it later in the semester, okay? Any questions?
For the assignment, does it have to have a narrative structure to it, or can it just be a bunch of random shots?
They can be random shots. Later in the semester, when we talk about shot sequences and shot design, then I want them to relate one to the other. But for now, I just want you to show me some different perspectives on some very nicely composed and well shot images. And then I want you to show me some focus racks. And I've outlined in the assignment what I want to see you do. Okay. That makes sense?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it makes sense.
So what do you say there, people? Any other questions, thoughts about what we discussed today? Anything at all that you're confused about or need more time with?
Is there any drawbacks to using adapters on a lens? If you're going from, say, an EF mount to a micro four thirds, is there any difference in how you use the camera for the focal length or anything like that?
Yes. I hesitate to answer your question with any more detail than that because I don't want to mess you up. But yes, there can be some drawbacks. When you're adapting certain kinds of lenses that are designed to work on full frame cameras and you're adapting them back and forth, that's when you're using these thin flange adapters like I've got on this Zeiss lens, because the focal distance from the optical center of this lens to the image plane is a prescribed distance for 50 millimeters. And in this case, let's say it's for Zeiss context, let's say the flange focal distance is supposed to be 42 millimeters. And then I'm going to adapt it to a Canon EF lens flange that has an optical flange focal distance of 43 meters, right? So I got 42 millimeters over here and 43 millimeters over here. That means this flange can only be a millimeter thick. And then the image will be out of focus at infinity or at minimum focusing distance, one or the other. Usually it's infinity. So in other words, the lens won't be able to track focus accurately, and it won't be able to reach its infinity setting, which is usually in this lens, it's beyond 60, it's beyond 25 feet. So it's at about, 25 feet is the last focus mark on this lens. And then from there to infinity is probably another 40 feet in reality. Usually on a 50 millimeter lens, infinity happens somewhere around 60 feet on the focus wheel. All right. But with a flange adapter on there, you might, a cheap one or one that's been poorly manufactured, when you focus this lens out to infinity, and you can see the little infinity mark here on my focus scale. When you focus out to infinity, the mountains in the background should be in sharp focus, but they're not. That's because the adapter wasn't made to the correct accuracy, to the right tolerances. Okay, so yes, you can have situations where you can be adversely affected by adapters. Now, in the case of micro four thirds and Canon EF, it's no problem. And the reason why is because the flange focal depth required of micro four thirds is only, I think it's 19 millimeters. The flange focal depth of a Canon EF lens and its image plane is 40, I think it's 45 millimeters. So what you have is a camera you want to adapt to that needs more flange focal depth than the Micro Four Thirds requires. And that's why the Micro Four Thirds, where is it? My Micro Four Thirds lens adapter is missing. Where is it? Here it is so thick. Here it is. Look how thick that is. Okay. This distance plus the distance the Micro Four Thirds requires to stay in sharp focus equals 45 millimeters. And that's easier to do because it's a much bigger piece that can be milled out in a CNC machine to a very fine degree of accuracy. Okay. And you have less issues of complication going big flange to little flange than you do going big flange to big flange, if that makes sense. Okay. So there are going to be some lenses and lens manufacturers that you can't adapt to certain cameras. And you'll find those through experience on the market as you're working with different pieces of gear. You don't run into them very often, but that's also another reason why I buy a lot of my cinema lenses with a Canon EF mount, because the EF flange requires the deepest flange focal depth of any other lenses on the market. Therefore, with a simple adapter, I can make them work on virtually any camera that I want through adapters. Okay. And that's the advantage of getting the one lens mount. I have different cameras here with different mounts. So I'm kind of in that situation where one day I might be on the micro pocket camera, that's Micro Four Thirds. One day I'm on the Ursa Mini, that's Canon EF. One day I'm on, well, my GH5s and my GH4s are Micro Four Thirds as well, so that's not a problem. But let's say I go with a new Canon R5 camera, or I want to shoot on an Arri camera with a PL mount. Now I got to use adapters, but I can do it because the EF is still needing more flange focal depth even than PL. Okay, so I can adapt those lenses to any camera I want. Okay.
Okay.
That was a good question. Anybody else? Aren't you guys bored of me yet?
One question, because you mentioned the declicking.
Yeah.
Those, do they do any of those, like it's the one you just had recently. It's the one that's extremely accurate that was introduced back in the 80s. The
Zeiss?
Yeah, the Zeiss.
This guy?
Yeah, that one.
So what was your question? Can I get this declicked?
Yeah, getting the declicked.
Yes, you can. There is a guy who's really good out in Los Angeles. His name is Dave Duclos, and he has a business called Duclos Lenses, Duclos. Duclos, some people call it Duclos. He pronounces it Duclos. And he is a second generation lens engineer. He worked for his father when his father opened Duclos Lenses in the 70s, I think. And they have a whole price list and a whole workflow designed to convert old Zeiss Yashica context lenses to any flange you want. They can make it permanently an EF flange. This one comes off and I can put this back on a context camera body if I want to. But they'll make this situation permanent with the flange adapter. They'll declick the f-stops for you. They'll give you a permanent focus gear on your focus ring, and they'll give you a flange that increases your accessory size from, this is 52, I think, 52 or 55 millimeters, out to a cinema size of 80 millimeters. So you'll end up, if you're using cinema filters, 80 millimeter cinema filters, they'll thread on the front of your Zeiss lenses as well. And they'll convert a whole set. It's called a cine mod or a cine modification. And they'll do that with Zeiss lenses. They'll do it with vintage Canon lenses, vintage Minolta lenses. They'll do it with a lot of different glass. Okay. Because this is the latest benefit of the digital generation, which is we have years and years of R&D and manufacturing and heritage, tradition, fashion photography for decades, for generations have been photographed on lenses like this and other lenses of unique quality. And one of the things we're learning in the digital cinema generation is that we can repurpose these lenses and get newfound value by just adapting them to a cinema camera. Then we get all the characteristics and quality that these lenses have to offer and all the vintage look that they have to offer. And it's not very expensive to own these, right? I think this lens, you can acquire this lens for a little under $300. If you bought a Zeiss CP3, the brand new cinema lens, it would cost you $5,000. Okay. So, well, maybe 300 bucks is a little bit steep for you right now. You could get it used on eBay, maybe for even less than that. If you're really, if you're really hunting and you're really keen on finding one, you probably find one. Okay. And the point is, it's accessible to you now. Whereas the Zeiss Cinema Glass, you might have to wait till you're a working professional and your clients are asking for it, and then they'll pay to rent them for you. Okay.
So no, has anyone built something similar to the Zeiss that produces similar quality?
Yeah, I've compared. I have all these. I have this entire lens line. I
Like,
bought
has anyone
them.
beaten that lens line in terms of quality?
Yeah. Well, beat them? No.
Okay.
No. Comparable? Yeah. I bought the entire series of Zeiss T-Star lenses in 2008. And I have the whole series of the Rokinon cinema lenses. Where's my 35? There it is. I have the whole series of Rokinon lenses. And one of the things that I did when I started buying Rokinons was I said, I'm tired of the teeth and the focus gears and the adapter rings. I'm tired of all that. I just want to pull a 35 millimeter out of the lens box and throw it on the camera and work and get my job done. I don't want to screw around with this anymore. So I started buying cinema lenses. Well, these are pretty inexpensive. And I thought, if I can get a good series of lenses that are relatively inexpensive, and as long as I rent them out, they'll pay for themselves, but they're going to make my life a lot easier. That's a good idea. So I started buying these, and then I started doing lens tests and comparing the Rokinons to the Zeiss lenses. And at 800% magnification, the Rokinons were only slightly softer than the Zeiss at 800% magnification. That means at 100% one-to-one magnification, frame to frame, you're not going to see any difference between this lens and a Zeiss lens in terms of sharpness. What you might see is a difference in the color rendering between the Rokinon and the Zeiss lens. The Rokinons are a little bit warmer and the Zeiss lenses are a little bit cooler. Okay. Now, next week, I'm going to talk to you about filters. You can fix the difference in color rendering between the two brands of lenses by applying a filter. Okay.
That was something actually it's going to be kind of interesting to me because one thing I'm doing right now because the Snyder Cut's coming out later this year, right? For Justice League, Zack Snyder's Justice League.
I did not know that.
Well, it's coming out the 18th of March this year.
Uh-huh.
And in preparation for that, I'm watching all the films leading up to it.
Yeah.
As well as Justice League from 4 years ago.
Okay.
And one thing I wanted to figure out was like the color filter, because in the original one that came out in theaters 4 years ago, most of that last big clash is colored in a gradient red, but in Snyder's version it's a dark blue. So that's gonna be a pretty interesting topic in my opinion with the color filters.
In that case, in this day and age, that color difference is done in post-production most of the time, 85, 90% of the time. The places where it's not done in post-production are on things like makeup commercials, product commercials, low budget TV shows and low budget movies where they don't have a lot of money to spend in post-production. And so they'll use filters and get the effect, what we call baked in. Okay. Once you put a filter in front of the lens and you capture some video, that color, whatever you've done with that filter, is forever baked into the image. But if you shoot the image clean, okay, like if you shoot it through Zeiss lenses that are optically neutral, you shoot everything clean and sharp, And then in post-production, you apply digital filters. You can change the color all day long. It's non-destructive. And you can always go back to your original look, which was optically color neutral. Okay. That's the power of post-production and the DI process and digital imagery and digital assets like filter packs and stuff, plugins that you can use in your NLE like DaVinci Resolve. And you can color correct to any color balance you want. So what you're talking about is a post-production process. But if I
Okay.
was shooting, like when I was your age, okay, and I was working on commercials, like car commercials and booze commercials and makeup commercials, those cinematographers, a lot of the reason why they got hired was because their looks were baked into the images and they were shooting on film, and film was still a mystery to people, right? Exposing for film and what you did to film to make it look beautiful was tradecraft, and it was protected information. And the only people who really got that information were the camera assistants who were trying to move up and become DPs ourselves eventually. And we were taught that, and we were trained how to do those things. And those guys would use filtration to affect the images, and then they wouldn't tell anybody how it was done. So the producers, you know, when the producers were looking for somebody to shoot their bourbon commercial or their Rolex commercial or whatever, you know, expensive product they were going to have on television and pay a lot of money for it to be seen in a commercial, they would hire a really good DP who demanded a high rate to shoot their products. Okay. And that was how we made money in the old days, right? Now, with the power of digital, we can make those changes in camera. We can make them in post-production. We can make those choices virtually anywhere we want. And as a result of that, what we're seeing as a growing trend is fewer and fewer decisions being made at the moment of capture, and more changes and decisions being made in post-production at a later time. And what that does is it just shifts priorities and costs from physical production to post-production. You're still spending the same amount of time and ultimately maybe a little bit more money to make your changes in post, and you're deferring your decisions from the day you shot the product to the day you edited and cut it together and packaged it for the client. Okay. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing. On the day you were shooting the product, you're on set and you were in the actual location, and the intoxication of being there and the adrenaline of being on the set and this awesome car and this beautiful model and this wonderful backdrop, and everything is inspiring you to shoot and create. And in that moment, you're in the perfect mindset. But then if you don't deal with that footage until 6 weeks later, when you get back to the States from Austria, where you were shooting on location, and now it's a rainy day in New York and you had to get up early to get to the post-production house because the time you paid for was booked in the morning, not the afternoon, and you're still jet lagged and you're having a bad day, and you get to post-production and you do a bad job color correcting because your headspace was all wrong, right? That's the trap you can fall into by pushing creativity off until later. If you're in the moment and you're feeling it, I'm all about baking it in. Just shoot it and do what you want to do, because when you're there and you're in that moment and you're focused on the job and your inspiration is affecting your hand to create something, I'm all about doing it right there and making that choice right then and there. Because if you wait, like I said, later you can be having a bad day, and then you've really got to make a decision and you make the wrong one because you waited. The moment's passed. You're no longer connected to that moment spiritually or creatively. It's over. So I like shooting in camera and getting the look in camera as close as I possibly can, and leave as little as possible left over to do in post-production, because I know I'm not going to be in the headspace when I finally get around to addressing that. I won't be in the same moment anymore. So there's benefits and drawbacks of having the amount of power we have in the age of digital. Some of it has made us timid and lazy, and some of it has empowered us to create things we never would have been able to create with film. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, and you have to manage those risks and expectations effectively. And that's what will make you a good cinematographer, is knowing when you can get away with something and wait, and knowing when you got to get it in camera, knowing what's required to get it in camera, and ask for that ahead of time, and don't surprise anybody with an inflated budget when it comes time to shoot, right? Be a good manager of your assets and your time, learn your skills, and then take any tool that's put in your hand and make it sing. That's what being a professional is all about.
Okay.
Doesn't matter. If you give me a Rebel T3i, I'm going to make images on that are going to look as valid as something I would make out of something like this or an Arri Alexa. I'm going to use that tool you put in my hand to its best advantage. I'm going to downplay its disadvantages, and I'm going to play to the appeal of the subject matter and the rhetoric of the story, whatever that story is. And I'm going to use that tool effectively and tell that story the best way I can with the tool in my hand. That's why if you have to make a choice next week and only shoot with this, that doesn't predicate that you can turn in a crappy looking assignment and get a good grade, because you should be able to take this tool, as limited as it is, and create some compelling content with it. If you can't, you need to study more. Okay? It's just a tool. And the strongest, most effective tool you've got is right between your ears. Okay? The more you know up here, the more you can do with this and make it look like this. Okay?
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Anybody else before we call it quits? No? Should we adjourn for the evening then?
Aye.
Yes? No? Maybe? Any more questions? All right, then. I'm going to call it 8:22. It's a wrap, everybody. Good luck on your assignment. I'll see you next week. If you have any questions for me in the meantime, send me an email and I'll address your issues the best I can. Otherwise, good luck on the homework, and I'll see you next week. Okay? Thanks a lot. Thanks for the questions, Marcus. Have a good night.
Good night.